welcome into Texans Today. I'm your host, Jeremy Chuggs, and on today's show, I'm breaking down the top 10 defensive tackle free agent targets for your Houston Texans. So, never miss anything. Make sure you stay locked in every single day on the channel. I'm bringing you more draft videos. I'm bringing you more free agency videos, and this is why you subscribe to the channel. Never miss a single moment around your Houston Texans. I'll have draft videos leading up to the draft, throughout free agency. If the Texans sign anybody, hey, go down and hit that sub button right now if you want daily Texans videos. And let's get right into it because I'm breaking down 10 free agent targets for the Houston Texans at defensive tackle. And number 10, it's somebody the Texans actually already brought in this past season in Teair Tart, the defensive tackle, formerly of the Tennessee Titans. I mean, he's a big guy, a big run stuffer up the middle, but I mean, on the list of top 10, he's towards the end for me. I mean, he came in, made somewhat of an impact for the Houston Texans this past year. 24 tackles, 1 sack, 8 tackles for loss. 6'2", 304, big guy, but he doesn't really move the needle for me. This is a guy that you fill out your roster with. A guy who, if he's your rotation defensive tackle, that's fine if he's your third or fourth guy. But I wouldn't really be excited if they're like, you know what, Teair Tart, he's starting next year. That wouldn't really move the needle for me. Same with this next guy. I think he's pretty decent. Adam Butler from the Las Vegas Raiders this past season. Another guy who I think he could be a good player for the Houston Texans. I think, he could be a guy who makes an impact at some level. Is he a guy who I'm really excited and want to start this season for the Houston Texans? Not necessarily, but he's got good size, 6'5", 303, had some good pass rush wins this past season for the Las Vegas Raiders with 5 sacks. Like I said, I think he's going to be a good guy that you rotate in. A starter, not so much. I think these first two guys are more rotation guys. You're trying to fill out the depth chart for the Houston Texans. Now, number 8, this is starting to get into starting territory. Fletcher Cox, he's on the down end of his career. All of his seasons have been with the Philadelphia Eagles. And this year, we saw a little bit more of that regression from Cox. I mean, 33 tackles, 5 sacks, 3 tackles for loss. He's still a very good player. And I think he could bring a leadership to this defensive tackle room that we haven't seen before. He's a guy who has a lot of skins on the wall. He's a guy who's been there, done that, won a Super Bowl. I think if Fletcher Cox wants out of Philly, I think I would consider bringing him in for the Houston Texans. I don't know if he necessarily does. I see him as a guy who ends his career with the Eagles, but if he's willing to test the free agent market, I wouldn't mind taking a flyer on him and having him be maybe a spot starter / a rotation guy. He's obviously a little bit on the older side, so he's not going to be able to play 600, 700, 800 snaps for you. But as a guy who's able to come in on, important downs, key situations, I really wouldn't mind bringing in Fletcher Cox if I was the Houston Texans. Now, I have a quick question for you, because for me, the answer is yes. But what say you? Is defensive tackle the biggest defensive need for the Houston Texans this offseason? Do you think it's corner, safety, linebacker? What do you think? I think it's obviously defensive tackle. You're losing Sheldon Rankins in free agency. Maybe the Texans re-sign him, but behind him you have Malik Collins and Kurt Hinish. And the Texans, they were throttled by the Ravens and the Colts in the running game. You need guys who can stop the run up the middle. The Texans did not have that this past year. So, for me, the answer is yes. Now, going to my next guy is Grover Stewart, defensive tackle for the Indianapolis Colts. He had a pretty decent year, a younger guy, Grover Stewart. I could see the Texans signing him from a division rival and strengthening their defensive line. Had a good year this past year for the Indianapolis Colts. A guy who, he's going to be a run stuffer. He's not going to get a ton of sacks. He's not a pass rush guy, but he's a guy who's able to, eat up blocks up the middle. He had 41 tackles, 5 tackles for loss this past season. Grover Stewart would be a guy who, a more low-key guy, but somebody the Texans should have an eye out for. And along with this next guy who I just mentioned, Sheldon Rankins, out of the Houston Texans this past season. Comes in at number 6. Obviously, had a pretty good year with the Texans, but I see Rankins as more of an interior pass rusher than I do a guy who can really stop the run. That's where his biggest flaw is, in my opinion. He's not a guy who I really see as a run stuffer up the middle, more of like a 3 technique that can really get after the quarterback. I think Sheldon Rankins is good. I wouldn't mind the Texans re-signing Sheldon Rankins, but if you sign Rankins, I still think you need a lot more help in that defensive tackle room. I still think you need to go out and draft somebody or sign one of these next guys on the list. Speaking of the next guys on the list, we're going to break down the top 5 defensive tackles I think the Texans should sign in free agency with all that money they have. They're in top 5 of cap space as it stands right now. I'm going to tell you my top 5, but first, got to shout out Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/CLNS and use code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks is daily fantasy sports made easy. All you got to do, pick 2 or more players, choose more or less in their projected stat types, and place your entry. And if you're wondering, hey, Jeremy, for the big game, what are you doing on Prize Picks? Well, here it is. Here are my picks. I'm going more on Patrick Mahomes' pass yards. They're giving you a freebie with 0.5. Then, Isaiah Pacheco, 0.5 rushing or receiving touchdowns. He's found pay dirt in the past 6 games, so him finding it again, I don't think that should be much of a problem for the Kansas City running back. And Brock Purdy, more than 248.5 pass yards. I think he'll hit that mark. So you can use my picks or fade my picks. Just do it at Prize Picks. Quick withdrawals and easy gameplay is why they're the #1 daily fantasy sports app. And using our link right now, prizepicks.com/CLNS, they're going to offer you a $100 deposit match. Go get started today for the big game. Go to prizepicks.com or download the app and use code CLNS to get started today. Now, these are the guys who I'm really considering for the Texans in free agency. These are the guys right now starting on this list is I'm like, I really, really want these guys. And number 1 is DJ Reader. And Texans fans, you know all too well about DJ Reader because he spent his first 4 seasons with the Houston Texans before they stupidly let him walk in free agency to go to the Cincinnati Bengals. DJ Reader is one of those guys who, like I said, he's not going to put up a bunch of sack numbers, but what he is going to do is stop the run and eat up blocks in the middle of that defense, allowing your linebackers to get tackles and really stop the run game for other teams. I really think DJ Reader could be a guy who, good story, homecoming, come back to Houston. I would really like a reunion between the Texans and DJ Reader this offseason if possible. Now, he is coming off injury, so that could kind of play a factor in him coming back next season and the role that he plays. But either way, I would really like to see DJ Reader playing for the Texans next season. My next guy, Leonard Williams from the Seattle Seahawks. Now, the Seahawks traded for Williams this past season, so I don't really see them letting go of him or letting him walk. But if they do, this is a guy that I really like the Texans to get. Now, he's one of those guys who's more of a pass rusher, but he's more of an elite pass rusher than Sheldon Rankins, in my opinion, and some other guys. I really like what Leonard Williams brings to the table. 62 tackles, 5.5 sacks, 10 tackles for loss. If the Texans are able to get Leonard Williams, I would be jumping for joy. I would absolutely love that. I think he is a top 10, 15 interior defensive lineman in the NFL. I would love if the Texans were able to sign Leonard Williams. Just like this next guy, Chris Jones, defensive tackle out of Kansas City. And now the only reason that he's number 3 on my list and not, number 2 or number 1 for me, don't get me wrong, the talent's there. Chris Jones is arguably the best defensive interior lineman in the National Football League. But he's getting up there in age, and I think he's going to want to break the bank this offseason. I think he's really going to be looking for a massive, massive deal. And if I'm the Houston Texans, signing a player that's, up there in age, getting into his 30s, at defensive tackle, I don't know if I really want to break the bank, spend $30 million plus on a guy like that. So that's the only reason why I'm a little hesitant on Chris Jones. The talent's there. He's a stud at defensive tackle. But what is it going to cost the Houston Texans? That's the only reason I have him at 3 and not higher on my list. Just like this next guy, Christian Wilkins from the Miami Dolphins. I would love for the Texans to be able to get this guy. a guy who kind of brings you the best of both worlds, in my opinion. He's able to get after the quarterback and be a run stuffer. He is a stout 6'4", 310 pounds out of Clemson. This past season, 65 tackles, 9 sacks, 10 tackles for loss. I mean, he is an absolute stud at the DT position. I think Christian Wilkins would be a huge get for the Houston Texans. And I think him plus, adding maybe another guy in free agency, maybe a later guy in the draft, I think you're really, really set up for success if you're the Houston Texans, if you're able to get him. And my number one guy that I want the Texans to get in free agency is Justin Madubuike, the defensive tackle from the Baltimore Ravens. We saw him a lot in the divisional round. Justin Madubuike, he was the best defensive lineman on the Ravens this past season. Let that sink in. One of the best defenses in the NFL. He was the best defensive lineman, not just DT. I'm talking edge. I'm talking everybody on the D-line. He was the absolute best this year for them. So if you're able to get a guy like that coming off of his rookie deal, he's going to command a lot of money in free agency. Maybe the highest paid guy, but he's young, entering his prime. I think the Texans would be foolish if they weren't at least trying to get Justin Madubuike if he wasn't franchise tagged by the Baltimore Ravens. This is my number one guy for Houston this offseason. Regardless of position, I would really like the Texans to be able to get Justin Madubuike, but let me know who you want the Texans to get. Who is the number one free agent DT this offseason, in your opinion, for the Houston Texans? Mine is Justin Madubuike, but let me know if you have any other guys, maybe not on my list. I'd be surprised if they weren't on my list already, but let me know down in the comment section who's your number one guy as we roll through my rankings just one more time. 10 through 6, we have Teair Tart, Adam Butler, Fletcher Cox, Grover Stewart, and Sheldon Rankins. And then rounding out my list 5 through 1, we have DJ Reader, Leonard Williams, Chris Jones, Christian Wilkins, and Justin Madubuike. That's all I have for you on today's show. If you haven't already, go down and hit that sub button. Go to youtube.com/TexansTV. We are the fastest growing Texans channel on YouTube. So get started today. We're trying to get to 11K subs. I'm trying to get to 20K subs by the start of next season. So if you haven't already, go down and hit that sub button. Go to youtube.com/TexansTV. Or if you know a Texans fan, show them my page. Say, hey, check this guy out. And maybe add another person to the Texans Today family as we keep on chugging along. Thank you for everybody for watching today's video, and hope you all have a good one.